Welcome back to the archive. I'm glad you've returned. If you've been enjoying these quiet wanderings through folklore and forgotten history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep the archive alive and ensures that this little candlelight corner of the internet stays lit. Tonight, we unroll a parchment that is perhaps more familiar than any other. A story of jack-o'-lanterns, of masks and merriment, of shadows and sweets. A night that is celebrated in crowded neighborhoods, quiet villages, and small towns across much of the world. It is a holiday of laughter, of fright, of mischief, and of remembrance. Tonight, we will be tracing the history of Halloween. It is a festival that did not appear suddenly, whole and ready-made, but rather grew from roots deep in the soil of many cultures. Like ivy climbing a stone wall, it wound its way across centuries and continents, adapting, blending, and reshaping itself until it became the celebration we know today. It is at once ancient and modern, half harvest rite, half playful carnival. At its core, Halloween has always been a night of thresholds, the threshold between autumn and winter, when the days shorten and the nights bite colder. The threshold between life and death, when stories tell us that the barrier thins and the departed might return for a visit. And the threshold between order and chaos, where mischief is allowed, masks are worn, and for just one night, the world feels turned upside down. We'll begin in the misty fields of Celtic Europe, where the festival of Samhain marked the turning of the year and the thinning of the veil. We'll follow it into the hands of the Romans, who folded their own rituals into the fabric of the season. We'll watch as the church claimed the date for All Hallows Eve, sanctifying it even as older traditions stubbornly remained. And then we'll cross the seas to America, where pumpkin patches and parades turned the night into something new, something both sacred and playful. Halloween is often thought of as a children's holiday now. Costumes, candy, bright orange pumpkins. But its roots are older than that, deeper, darker, more solemn. It has been a festival of fear and of fun, of the living and the dead, of protection and play. That duality is part of why it endures. Few nights carry such contradictions so comfortably. So, settle in, adjust your blanket, let the flicker of the candle steady your thoughts, and let us step together into a night between worlds. This is the history of Halloween, long before the name Halloween was spoken, long before pumpkins were carved or children donned costumes. The ancient Celts marked the turning of the year with a festival called Samhain, pronounced Samhain. This was not just a celebration, but a boundary in time, a hinge on which the seasons turned. To the Celtic peoples of Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Britain, Samhain was the new year, the end of the harvest season, and the beginning of the long, dark winter. The Celts divided their year into two halves, the light and the dark. Samhain fell at the moment when light gave way, when days shortened, and the cold breath of winter began to creep across the land. It was both an ending and a beginning, carrying with it a sense of solemnity. The last of the harvest was brought in. Cattle were driven from summer pastures into winter shelters, and stores of food were measured with anxious calculation. But Samhain was more than just practical preparation. It was, above all, a spiritual threshold. On this night, the Celts believed the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead grew thin. Spirits of ancestors could return, slipping through the veil to visit the living. The boundary was porous, and with beloved kin might also come more mischievous or malevolent beings, spirits that brought misfortune or illness if not properly appeased. To mark this night, great bonfires were lit upon hilltops, blazing against the lengthening dark. Communities gathered around them for protection, warmth, and ritual. The fires were sacred, often kindled with ceremonial intent by druids, who oversaw the spiritual order of the tribes. From these flames, families carried torches back to their homes to relight their hearths, symbolizing renewal for the new year. Samhain was not a night of fear so much as a night of awe. The dead were near, the gods attentive, and the cycle of nature shifting into its most dangerous half. For the Celts, who lived close to the land and relied so heavily upon it, these rhythms were everything. To honor them with ritual and fire was to maintain balance, to keep chaos at bay. Though we live in a different world now, the echoes of Samhain remain. The idea of the veil thinning, the imagery of fire and harvest, the sense of crossing a threshold, all of these live on in Halloween as we celebrate it today. Samhain was, in essence, the seed from which Halloween would grow. For the Celts, Samhain was a night when the dead walked among the living. It was not only about preparing for the harsh winter, but also about remembering those who had gone before. Ancestors were not forgotten. They were invited, welcomed, honored with offerings and prayers. Families would set places at their tables for departed relatives, leaving out food and drink as tokens of respect. Some accounts tell of entire meals prepared for the unseen guests, with a portion of bread or meat left by the hearth or doorway, intended for wandering spirits. This practice echoed the belief that to care for the dead was to keep the community safe, for neglected souls might grow restless or resentful. Yet it was not only ancestors who might slip through the veil. Folklore speaks of other beings, too, spirits of the wild, mischievous fae, and darker presences who thrived on mischief or malice. To protect themselves, the living would sometimes wear disguises, cloaking themselves in animal skins or costumes so that wandering spirits might mistake them for their own. Here, we see the earliest roots of what would become the Halloween costume tradition. Imagine it: the flickering firelight, the cold wind biting across the hills, villagers gathered close with masks upon their faces, both mocking and imitating the unseen. It was not merely for amusement, but for survival, for protection. To wear a disguise was to blur one's identity, to hide from those who might cause harm. This belief in the nearness of the dead and the necessity of disguises shows us something fundamental about early Halloween's character. It was not yet a holiday of sweets and laughter, but of reverence mixed with caution. To the Celts, the dead were neither wholly feared nor wholly adored. They were powerful, present, and deserving of attention. It is no coincidence that later Christian traditions would also frame this night as one of remembrance, for the idea of honoring the dead was already deeply embedded in the season. Whether through ancestor offerings, protective costumes, or whispered prayers, the people of Samhain were engaging with a mystery as old as humanity itself: how to live in a world where the dead never fully depart. If there was one constant at Samhain, it was fire. Fire was life, warmth against the chill, light against the dark, and a symbol of divine presence. Great bonfires blazed at the edges of villages, serving both ritual and practical purposes. Cattle, vital for survival, were often driven between two great fires in a practice of symbolic purification. The smoke was thought to cleanse, protect, and ensure health for the coming winter. People, too, would pass close to the flames, carrying away a spark to rekindle their home hearths, ensuring that every household carried the sacred fire into the new year. Sacrifices, too, played their part. Early sources, though often written by hostile Roman commentators, suggest that offerings of crops and perhaps even animals were made to the gods during Samhain. While the more lurid claims of human sacrifice are debated by scholars, there is little doubt that the night was one of giving back, of surrendering a portion of what had been harvested to secure protection. Fire and offering were bound together in symbolism. By burning crops, by casting bones or remnants into the flames, the people enacted a cycle of exchange, giving to the unseen in hopes of receiving blessings. Fire consumed, transformed, and carried offerings into the other world. For the Celts, these rituals were not superstition, they were survival. Winter was cruel, unpredictable, and death was always near. To engage in ritual was to create order in the face of uncertainty, to align with forces larger than oneself. Fire was the shield that guarded the living, a reminder that warmth and light could hold back the long dark. Even now, when we see the glow of jack-o'-lanterns or the flicker of candles on Halloween night, we are looking at the faint descendants of those great Samhain fires. What once blazed on hilltops now glows in miniature, but the essence remains. Fire as protection, as remembrance, as a beacon in the dark. Samhain was, above all, a liminal night, a night of crossing when the ordinary boundaries of the world blurred. This idea of the veil thinning between the living and the dead, the natural and supernatural, lay at the very heart of the festival. Stories tell of druids moving between realms in visions, of spirits wandering roads and fields, of otherworldly beings slipping easily into human lands. In Irish mythology, Samhain is the setting for many tales. Invasions by supernatural forces, encounters with gods and fairies, moments when heroes crossed into worlds unseen. The festival itself was woven into myth, inseparable from the idea of cosmic danger and possibility. For ordinary people, the veil's thinness was both gift and risk. It allowed for communion with ancestors, a closeness to the departed. But it also meant vulnerability, for malevolent forces might also walk abroad. Thus, protection was sought through ritual, disguise, and offering. This idea of liminality, the in-between space, would echo through later Halloween traditions, masks, costumes, and the belief in roaming spirits all trace back to this perception of a night when the rules loosened, when chaos brushed against order. Even the setting of Samhain, halfway between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, reinforced this theme. It was literally a midpoint, a balance that leaned toward darkness. To stand at Samhain was to stand on a threshold, aware of what lay behind and what approached ahead. That imagery persists even now. On Halloween night, when children knock on doors dressed as monsters, when lanterns flicker on porches, there is still that sense of something uncanny, something other, hovering close. It may be playful now, softened by candy and laughter, but the old bones of Samhain still lie beneath it. The thin veil is perhaps Halloween's greatest inheritance from its Celtic roots, the idea that for one night the worlds draw close, and we must move carefully between them. Though centuries would pass and empires would rise and fall, the echoes of Samhain never fully disappeared. As Christianity spread through Celtic lands, the church sought to reshape the calendar, overlaying sacred festivals with Christian feasts. Yet the old patterns clung tightly, and Samhain left its fingerprints all across what would become All Hallows Eve and eventually Halloween. The church declared All Saints' Day on November the 1st, a holy day to honor saints and martyrs. The evening before, October 31st, became All Hallows Eve. But while the name changed, many of the customs persisted, Bonfires still burned. Food was still offered. The belief in roaming spirits did not vanish. It merely shifted to fit within a new religious framework. Folk practices of leaving food for souls became linked with prayers for the departed, evolving into the custom of souling, where poor folk would go door to door, offering prayers in exchange for food. This practice would, centuries later, help shape the trick-or-treating we know today. Even in the imagery, the resonance is clear. The glowing lanterns we carve from pumpkins today have ancestors in the hollowed-out turnips of Ireland, lit with embers to frighten spirits or represent wandering souls. The masks worn at Samhain found new life in mummer plays, in costumes meant for seasonal mischief. The festival adapted, survived, transformed. What Samhain gave us was not only ritual, but a way of thinking about the season. It gave us the association of October's end with the supernatural, with the dead walking close, with fire and disguise as protection. These ideas proved too enduring, too deeply woven into cultural memory to be erased. Thus, every Halloween carries a faint whisper of that older night. The laughter of children in costumes, the flicker of porch lanterns, the rituals of food and fire. All of these are modern echoes of a festival once held on lonely hillsides beneath the Celtic stars. When Rome's legions marched into Celtic lands, they brought with them not only iron and empire, but also their own rituals of the season. Among these were festivals that bore an uncanny resemblance to Samhain. Rome's influence stretched far, and in their weaving of conquered traditions, Halloween began to shift and take new forms. One such festival was Feralia, held in late February, when Romans honored the spirits of the dead. Families would gather at the graves of loved ones, leaving food, wreaths, and offerings of wine. It was a night of solemn remembrance, a recognition that the dead required acknowledgement lest they grow restless. Another was Lemuria, a May ritual intended to banish malevolent spirits. The head of a household would walk barefoot through his home at midnight, tossing black beans over his shoulder while chanting prayers to drive out ghosts. These beans, strangely enough, were thought to lure spirits away, as if their hunger could be satisfied by such offerings. But perhaps most important to Halloween's future was the festival of Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and orchards. Celebrated in the autumn, her feast honored the bounty of the harvest, particularly apples. It is here that many scholars see the origin of apple divining customs, such as bobbing for apples or peeling an apple's skin to predict one's future spouse. When the Romans encountered Celtic Samhain, these traditions mingled. Festivals of the dead, rituals of banishment, and celebrations of the harvest overlapped and intertwined. Rome did not erase Samhain. It folded it into its own calendar, creating a hybrid season rich in remembrance, fear, and festivity. This mingling of customs reminds us that holidays are never static. They evolve, absorb, and reshape themselves according to the people who keep them. Halloween was already becoming a patchwork quilt, Celtic bonfires stitched beside Roman offerings, druidic rituals embroidered with the goddess Pomona's apples. The blending had begun, and it would only continue as the centuries passed. As Christianity spread across Europe, the church faced a challenge. Pagan festivals like Samhain and Roman rituals held deep cultural weight. Erasing them entirely proved impossible. Instead, the church often chose to overlay Christian feasts atop older celebrations, redirecting their meaning without fully extinguishing their power. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome to all Christian martyrs. This act created the Feast of All Saints, initially celebrated in May. But in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III moved the feast to November 1st, placing it squarely atop the season of Samhain. Some historians suggest this was intentional, a way to Christianize an already powerful date in the pagan calendar. By the 9th century, All Saints' Day had spread across much of Europe. It was a solemn day to honor not only martyrs, but all saints who had entered heaven. Its vigil, the evening before, became known as All Hallows Eve, and thus the name Halloween first entered the Christian world. The overlap was not seamless. While the church sanctified the day with masses and prayers, the common people often retained their older practices. Fires were still lit, food was still left for spirits. The thinness of the veil still whispered beneath the surface, even as priests urged their congregations toward more orthodox rites. This tension between official religion and folk practice defined much of medieval Europe's seasonal celebrations. The church could declare November 1st holy, but it could not erase the centuries-old memory of Samhain's bonfires and masks. Instead, the two coexisted, blurring together, each shaping the other. And so, Halloween began its next transformation, from a Celtic New Year to a Christian vigil. No longer entirely pagan, not yet fully Christian, it became a liminal night in the calendar itself, halfway between sacred and secular, old and new. If All Saints' Day was about heaven, then the following day, November 2nd, became about those still waiting. All Souls' Day was established to pray for the departed who had not yet reached paradise, those believed to be in purgatory. For the church, this was a way of extending Christian theology into folk concerns about the restless dead. Instead of wandering spirits to be feared, the souls of the departed were reframed as poor souls needing prayers. Offerings of food and acts of charity became ways of interceding on their behalf, hastening their journey to heaven. This blending of doctrine and custom gave rise to the practice of souling. On All Souls' Eve, poor villagers and children would go door to door, offering to pray for the souls of a household's dead in exchange for food, often small round cakes called soul cakes. Each cake eaten was thought to free a soul from purgatory. If All Saints' Day was about heaven, then the following day, November 2nd, became about those still waiting. All Souls' Day was established to pray for the departed who had not yet reached paradise, those believed to be in purgatory. For the church, this was a way of extending Christian theology into folk concerns about the restless dead. Instead of wandering spirits to be feared, the souls of the departed were reframed as poor souls needing prayers. Offerings of food and acts of charity became ways of interceding on their behalf, hastening their journey to heaven. This blending of doctrine and custom gave rise to the practice of souling. On All Souls' Eve, poor villagers and children would go door to door, offering to pray for the souls of a household's dead in exchange for food, often small round cakes called soul cakes. Each cake eaten was thought to free a soul from purgatory. Though the church sought to tame the season with saints and prayers, folk customs remained stubbornly lively. In the villages and fields, Halloween was still a night of masks and mischief. Medieval accounts describe groups of young people roaming from house to house in disguise, demanding food, ale, or coins. Sometimes they performed songs or plays, often crude or humorous. Other times they caused harmless chaos, upturning carts, scattering hay, or knocking on doors and running away. This was part of the season's older theme, a temporary inversion of order. For one night, rules loosened. The lowly might mock the powerful, the young might trouble the old, and the world turned upside down. The masks allowed anonymity, a freedom to behave in ways otherwise forbidden. Such behavior was not merely tolerated, but often expected. Villagers understood it as part of the ritual cycle, a way of venting tension, of letting mischief have its night so that order could return with the dawn. If spirits were believed to roam abroad, then it made sense for people to act a little like spirits too. Unpredictable, unbound, masked. Some of this mischief carried echoes of older pagan customs, but it also reflected medieval society's need for release. Life was hard, rules strict, punishments harsh. A night of playful disorder was paradoxically a way of preserving balance. Masks themselves became increasingly elaborate. While early disguises were crude, later centuries saw painted faces, masks of devils or animals, and even simple costumes stitched together for the season. The idea of transformation, of stepping into another identity for a night, grew ever more central. These customs remind us that Halloween has always been about more than solemn remembrance. It has also been about play, chaos, and the thrill of slipping free from ordinary rules. Beneath the laughter of children in costumes, today lies the echo of medieval youths roaming by torchlight, their faces hidden, their voices disguised, their mischief as much ritual as entertainment. Despite centuries of Christian overlay, the pagan roots of Halloween never fully vanished. The church could rename, sanctify, and preach. But beneath the surface, the old beliefs remained like glowing embers. In rural areas especially, traditions of divination persisted. Young people peeled apples in single strips, tossing the peel over their shoulders to see what initial it formed on the ground, revealing the name of a future spouse. Nuts were placed in fires to tempt the fates of lovers, their cracking and popping said to foretell the strength of a relationship. These were not practices endorsed by priests, yet they endured because they spoke to ordinary people's hopes and fears. Harvest time was not only about survival, but about love, marriage, and the future. Halloween became a time not only of ghosts, but of guessing games, when the veil's thinness offered glimpses into what was to come. Fire rituals also lingered. Bonfires continued to be lit well into the Middle Ages, their glow both protective and festive. People still believed that spirits roamed, that mischief was near, and that the season was more than ordinary time. The church may have claimed the night for All Hallows Eve, but folk belief gave it depth and colour. It remained a night of the uncanny, when fate might be glimpsed, when spirits might walk, when the balance of life and death felt unusually close. These lingering shadows remind us that holidays are never fully conquered. They are living things, carrying layers of memory. Halloween today is not purely pagan, nor purely Christian, nor purely secular. It is all of them at once, a palimpsest of centuries of belief. And it was in this medieval mixture of fire, faith, and folk ritual that Halloween settled into the form that would later cross the seas. When Halloween's ancestral traditions crossed the seas with European settlers, they did not immediately take root in the soil of the New World. In fact, the earliest colonists were some of its fiercest opponents. The Puritans who settled much of New England in the 17th century viewed festivals like All Hallows Eve with deep suspicion. To them, such holidays were not quaint folk customs, but dangerous remnants of pagan superstition. The Puritan worldview was stark. Life was a battlefield between God and the devil, heaven and hell, salvation and damnation. Anything that smacked of witchcraft, spirits, or folk ritual was treated not as harmless play, but as consorting with evil. In their communities, strict laws and sermons sought to purge even the faintest trace of popish or heathen practices. Halloween, with its masks, fires, and spirit-inviting rituals, was entirely unwelcome. Yet folklore is stubborn. Even as Puritans tried to root out such traditions, the stories and custom of Celtic, English, and Irish settlers found ways to linger. Ghost stories crept into winter nights, whispered around fires when fields were bare. Superstitions about omens, spirits, and the restless dead quietly endured in backwoods communities. The Puritan suspicion of Halloween also had lasting consequences for how the holiday developed in America. For centuries, it remained a marginal practice, not widely celebrated in the rigid religious colonies. It would take waves of later immigrants to truly reintroduce and reshape it. But in this early chapter, Halloween was a thing feared, forbidden, and quietly surviving in whispers. The irony is that the very soil of New England, so hostile to Halloween, would later give birth to one of its most enduring legends, the witch trials of Salem. The paranoia and fear of unseen forces that had once rejected Halloween became, in time, part of its cultural story. For if Halloween is about anything, it is about how societies wrestle with the presence of the uncanny. If the Puritans suppressed Halloween, later immigrants revived it. By the 19th century, America was no longer a land dominated solely by stern New England Calvinism. Waves of newcomers arrived, carrying with them their folk traditions, and among the most influential were the Irish and Scottish immigrants, many of whom fled famine in the mid-1800s. These communities brought with them memories of Samhain, All Hallows Eve, and centuries of hybrid customs. They carved lanterns, not yet pumpkins, but often potatoes or turnips. They carried stories of spirits, witches, and fairy mischief. They brought games of divination, songs, and superstitions of the October night. In rural towns, these traditions mingled with the customs of English immigrants, who themselves had preserved practices of souling and mischief nights. By the mid-19th century, Halloween was beginning to appear across America, still patchwork, still regional, but unmistakably present. The Irish also gave the holiday some of its most enduring symbols. It was through them that the story of the jack-o'-lantern became widely known, with its trickster ghost named Stingy Jack, condemned to wander the earth with a hollowed-out lantern. When they encountered the North American pumpkin, larger, brighter, and easier to carve, the tradition blossomed into something uniquely American. Immigration gave Halloween a second life in the New World. What had been suppressed by Puritans returned in strength through the voices and hands of new arrivals. And in doing so, the holiday began to take on the shape we now recognize, a mixture of European folk belief, Christian overlay, and distinctly American adaptation. Even before the full revival of Halloween, colonial America had its own ways of marking the uncanny. Ghost stories were popular around harvest fires, when the work of gathering crops was complete and nights stretched long. Communities gathered to share tales of the unexplained, often blending European folklore with local legends of the New World. Superstitions ran strong. Some colonists believed that owls were omens of death or that black cats carried the devil's favor. Divination games, particularly among young women, became common. Peeling apples, tossing nuts into fires, and gazing into mirrors by candlelight were all thought to reveal one's future husband. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Halloween-like gatherings were taking shape in rural areas, especially in the southern colonies and along the frontier. These events were often less solemn than their European ancestors and more communal. Neighbors gathered for harvest festivals with games, ghost stories, and playful mischief. Here we see the holiday beginning to transform from one of fear and reverence into one of community and entertainment. Instead of primarily appeasing spirits, Halloween became a chance for neighbors to meet, laugh, and share a night of tales. It was not yet the commercial spectacle it would become, but the seeds of social celebration were being sown. As Halloween developed in the New World, one of its most enduring features reappeared: mischief. By the 19th century, American youths had begun their own traditions of pranks and nighttime chaos, often detached from their European religious roots. These mischief nights varied from harmless tricks, knocking on doors and running away, to more destructive acts, removing gates, soaping windows, or scattering livestock. For rural communities, this was often tolerated as seasonal misrule, echoing medieval customs. Yet by the late 1800s, newspapers were filled with complaints about Halloween vandalism, particularly in growing towns. Masks played a role here as well. Disguises allowed anonymity, emboldening young pranksters. Shops even began selling crude paper masks specifically for the season, a hint of the commercialization to come. This rise of mischief in America set the stage for Halloween's later transformation. Communities, tired of chaos, sought ways to redirect youthful energy into safer forms of celebration. Out of this problem, the more family-friendly Halloween we know today would emerge. But in the 19th century, Halloween was a night of tricks far more than treats. It was a liminal time when rules bent, a reflection of the old Celtic and medieval spirit of inversion. Mischief was not an accident. It was the heartbeat of the holiday. By the end of the 19th century, Halloween in America was changing rapidly. It was no longer simply an echo of Celtic Samhain or a Christian vigil. It was becoming a distinctly American holiday. Immigrants had brought their traditions, Puritans had resisted, colonial communities had adapted, and mischief had surged. Out of this stew of influences, Halloween began to crystallize into something new. Parades appeared in small towns, blending costumes with community gathering. Newspaper advice columns encouraged parents to host parties as safer alternatives to vandalism. The imagery of witches, ghosts, and jack-o'-lanterns became increasingly common in printed illustrations and holiday cards. By 1900, Halloween was recognizable as a public celebration, halfway between its folk roots and its commercial future. Yet it retained its identity as a night of the uncanny. The stories, games, and symbols that filled Halloween parties were all echoes of older beliefs. The dead walking, the future revealed, the mask hiding true faces. It was never just about fun. It carried with it the shadow of centuries. In America's hands, Halloween became more theatrical, more playful, more widely shared. It was no longer merely the survival ritual of Celtic villages or the solemn vigil of medieval churches. It was now an event for neighborhoods, towns, and children alike. The stage was set for its final transformation, the creation of the 20th century Halloween, with costumes, candy, and cultural dominance. But its heart, its history as a night of thresholds, remained. By the early 20th century, Halloween in America was in danger of becoming known less as a holiday and more as a public nuisance. Mischief night pranks were escalating far beyond harmless tricks. In cities, gangs of youths toppled fences, smashed windows, and even set fires. Rural towns awoke after October 31st to find wagons disassembled and livestock let loose. Newspapers of the 1910s are full of editorials from exasperated mayors and police chiefs begging parents to control their children on Halloween night. Communities, however, began to adapt. Instead of trying to suppress Halloween altogether, they sought to channel its chaotic energy into safer, more constructive outlets. The solution was simple: provide alternatives. If mischief was inevitable, why not turn it into play? Neighborhood organizations, women's clubs, and even city governments began sponsoring Halloween parties and parades. By the 1920s, it was common to see costumed children marching down Main Street with lanterns. or families gathering in schoolhouses and church halls for games, storytelling, and bobbing for apples. Mischief became ritualized into contests, jokes, and playful tricks performed under watchful adult eyes. These community events softened Halloween's reputation. Instead of a night of vandalism, it became increasingly framed as a holiday for children and families. Local businesses leaned in as well, decorating storefronts with pumpkins and offering candy or baked goods as prizes. The social shift was dramatic. Halloween was being reclaimed from chaos and given a place in polite society. This transformation was not immediate or universal. Pranks continued well into the 1930s, but the pattern was clear. By turning mischief into merriment, Halloween shed much of its destructive edge and began its rise as a holiday of joy, community, and childhood memory. Costumes had always been part of Halloween, but in the early 20th century, they underwent a transformation. No longer were disguises crude animal skins or paper masks. They became products. By the 1930s, department stores sold ready-made costumes, often inspired by popular culture. Children could dress as witches, ghosts, pirates, or even characters from films and comic strips. The shift from homemade disguises to store-bought costumes reflected the larger trend of Halloween's commercialization. Candy manufacturers, paper goods companies, and even radio broadcasters began to recognize the holiday's potential. Halloween cards, posters, and decorations appeared in catalogs alongside Christmas ornaments. Magazines ran features on how to host the perfect Halloween party, complete with recipes for pumpkin pies and suggestions for spooky games. This was the era when Halloween began to look like the holiday we recognize today. Costumes became colorful, playful, and safe. Ghosts and skeletons were still present, but now softened with cartoonish edges. Children no longer hid behind masks to escape wandering spirits. They dressed up to entertain, to play, and to share in the fun. The commercialization of Halloween was not purely cynical. For many families, it offered joy during difficult times. The 1930s, marked by the Great Depression, saw Halloween parties as affordable entertainment. A paper mask cost only a few cents, and community events gave children a chance to laugh despite hardship. Halloween was both escapism and tradition, and the fact that it could be packaged and sold only helped it spread further. By mid-century, Halloween had become a fully modern holiday. Costumed parades, decorated storefronts, and candy bowls waiting by the door. The seeds planted in the early 1900s were now blooming into a distinctly American tradition, bright, playful, and increasingly profitable. The post-war boom of the 1950s and 60s gave rise to what many remember as the golden age of Halloween. Suburban neighborhoods, with their tidy rows of houses and safe sidewalks, became perfect landscapes for trick-or-treating. The holiday, once scattered and regional, became a unified, nationwide tradition. Halloween night was now a community-wide event. Streets filled with children in colorful costumes, parents trailing behind, porch lights glowing in welcome. The air smelled of leaves, bonfire smoke, and melted wax from pumpkins flickering on steps. In many neighborhoods, nearly every house participated. To keep a porch dark was to risk the scorn of children who passed it by. Television and popular culture cemented Halloween's identity. Cartoons like It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown became annual traditions, reinforcing the imagery of jack-o'-lanterns, costumed children, and the mix of sweetness and spookiness. Advertisers leaned in, promoting candy brands as essential to the holiday. By the 1970s, candy sales in October rivaled Christmas treats. This golden age also reshaped the holiday's tone. Halloween was no longer about chaos or fear. It was playful, suburban, almost wholesome. The darker, older edges of Samhain and medieval misrule were smoothed away, replaced with paper ghosts, plastic pumpkins, and bite-sized chocolate bars. Yet even in its gentleness, Halloween retained its magic. For children, it was a night of freedom. Costumes turned them into pirates or monsters. And the world itself seemed enchanted as porches opened with treats. For parents, it was nostalgia and community, a reminder of shared traditions. Halloween had become a cultural anchor, woven into the fabric of American family life. By the late 20th century, Halloween had fully escaped its roots as a folk festival and cemented itself as a pop culture phenomenon. No longer just a night of candy and costumes, it became a season, with films, music, and marketing campaigns built entirely around its imagery. Horror movies fueled this shift. Films like Halloween, 1978, and Friday the 13th, 1980, turned October into the month of fear, establishing slasher villains as icons of the holiday. Haunted houses and horror attractions followed, selling not reverence but adrenaline. Halloween became the one night when the culture celebrated fear itself. At the same time, Halloween became commercial gold. Candy sales skyrocketed, costume companies expanded their catalogs, and every television network added Halloween specials. By the 1980s and 90s, it was common for children to see entire aisles of Halloween decorations in department stores. Halloween also expanded beyond children. Adults reclaimed it as a holiday of costumes, parties, and imagination. Bars, nightclubs, and theaters hosted masquerades. Office costume contests became staples. It was no longer just for children running door to door. It was for anyone who wanted, for one night, to be someone else. In this shift, Halloween completed its transformation. From Samhain's sacred threshold to Puritan suspicion, from immigrant folklore to suburban candy bowls, it became a fully modern holiday. Theatrical, communal, and endlessly adaptable. Halloween had become not just a night, but an industry, a season, and a cultural ritual celebrated around the globe. Today in America, Halloween is more than just a holiday. It's an entire season. By the first chill of October, houses transform into stages of spooky delight. Porches glow with jack-o'-lanterns, spider webs stretch across hedges, and inflatable ghosts bob gently in suburban yards. For children, it remains the most magical night of the year, a time when they can step outside in costume, knock on doors, and return home with candy enough to last weeks. But Halloween is not just for children anymore. Adults have embraced it with equal passion. Cities host elaborate parades. New York's Village Halloween Parade draws thousands of costumed revelers each year. Bars and theaters stage masquerade balls. Haunted attractions rise in abandoned buildings, and entire neighborhoods compete for the best decorated houses. For one night, everyone is encouraged to play, to disguise, to step into another self. Economically, Halloween has become staggering. Americans spend billions each year on costumes, candy, and decorations. The holiday rivals Christmas in its commercial scope, though with a very different spirit. Where Christmas emphasizes giving and family, Halloween leans into transformation, imagination, and playful fear. Yet even in its spectacle, the echoes of the past remain. Trick-or-treating still reflects medieval souling. Pumpkins glow as descendants of Celtic fire rituals. Ghost stories whispered in living rooms carry the same thrill as those told around ancient bonfires. Halloween is modern, but it is also timeless, forever carrying traces of Samhain beneath its candy wrappers and plastic masks. One of the most striking developments of modern Halloween has been the rise of haunted attractions. What began as small community haunted houses in the mid-20th century has grown into a vast industry of immersive horror. Today, abandoned warehouses become labyrinths of fear, cornfields transform into haunted mazes, and amusement parks dedicate entire months to Halloween festivals. The popularity of these attractions speaks to Halloween's dual nature. It is playful, but it also thrives on fear. People willingly seek out chills, paying to walk through dark corridors where costumed actors leap from shadows. Unlike the ancient Celts who feared the dead as genuine threats, modern audiences embrace fear as entertainment. This business of fear is vast. In the US alone, haunted attractions generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Some are modest, high school fundraisers with painted cardboard tombstones, while others rival film sets in scale with professional makeup, animatronics, and Hollywood-quality design. And yet, beneath the screams and flashing lights, one finds echoes of much older rituals, gathering in the dark, confronting shadows together, and walking away safe. Haunted attractions remind us that Halloween has always been about standing at the edge of the unknown. Only now, we buy tickets for the privilege. Though born from Celtic roots and reshaped in America, Halloween has spread far beyond its origins. Across the globe, communities have adopted and adapted its imagery, costumes, and traditions. In Ireland and Scotland, where Samhain first began, Halloween is still celebrated with bonfires, fireworks, and traditional games. Children go guising, dressing in costumes, and performing songs or jokes in exchange for sweets, a practice older than American trick-or-treating. In Mexico, Halloween overlaps with Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. Here, the focus is on honoring ancestors with altars, marigolds, and offerings. Families gather in cemeteries to eat, sing, and welcome the spirits of the departed, a vivid reminder of Halloween's ancient ties to the dead. In Japan, Halloween has become a spectacle of fashion and cosplay. Tokyo's Shibuya district floods with costumed revelers each October, not trick-or-treating, but parading, photographing, and celebrating transformation. It reflects the playful, performative side of the holiday. Elsewhere, in Canada, the UK, Australia, and beyond, trick-or-treating, parties, and pumpkin carving are now commonplace. Halloween has become a global festival, shaped by each culture's own traditions, but unified by masks, lanterns, and a fascination with the uncanny. As Halloween has grown into a global spectacle, it has also faced criticism. Some religious groups view it as a holiday too closely tied to paganism or the occult, urging families to avoid it. Others see its commercialization as excessive, lamenting that ancient traditions of remembrance and storytelling have been drowned beneath piles of candy wrappers. Concerns about safety also persist. Parents warn of tampered treats, though most cases are urban legends rather than reality. Communities debate how much is too much. Should children wander after dark? Should costumes be restricted in schools? Even as Halloween thrives, it remains a holiday of tension, straddling playfulness and anxiety. And yet, for all these concerns, Halloween continues to endure. Its power lies in flexibility. It is both ancient and modern, serious and playful, communal and individual. Each generation reshapes it, and each year, despite debates and doubts, the lanterns are lit once again. Despite centuries of change, Halloween retains its ancient essence. Beneath the candy, costumes, and parades lies the same idea that shaped Samhain. This is a night when the ordinary world feels thinner, when the line between the living and the dead, the safe and the strange, bends just slightly. Children sense it in the thrill of walking darkened streets, their footsteps echoing between glowing pumpkins. Adults feel it in the ritual of donning a mask, in the laughter that masks a hint of unease. Even skeptics admit there is something uncanny about October 31st, something different in the air, as though the past itself lingers close. Halloween has become a holiday of joy, of play, of commerce, of creativity. Yet it is also a reminder of mortality, of ancestry, of the mysteries that have haunted humanity since the beginning. For all its changes, it is still, at heart, a night of thresholds. In this way, Halloween endures not because it forgets its past, but because it remembers. It remembers Samhain's bonfires, medieval masks, colonial fears, immigrant lanterns, suburban porches, and neon parades. Each layer adds to its richness. Each October, we step once more into that night between worlds. And so, our journey through the long history of Halloween draws to a close. From the wind-swept hills of Celtic Europe to the parades of modern cities, we have followed this festival as it shifted, adapted, and endured. What began as Samhain, a solemn night of endings and beginnings, carried its spirit into Roman rituals, into medieval vigils, into Puritan fears, and finally into the candy-filled laughter of American neighborhoods. Each generation added its own layer, and yet the heart of the holiday, the sense of a night when the ordinary and the extraordinary touch, has never vanished. Tonight, when lanterns glow on porches and costumes fill the streets, we are participating in something much older than we realize. The flicker of a jack-o'-lantern is an echo of bonfires once lit to guard against winter's cold. The laughter of children in disguise carries faint memories of masks worn to confuse wandering spirits. Even the candy dropped into plastic buckets is part of a chain stretching back to offerings left for ancestors at the hearth. Halloween has grown into a spectacle, yes, a season of parties, parades, and endless shelves of decorations. But it has also remained deeply human. It is about fear and fun, life and death, memory and imagination. We celebrate because it allows us, for one night, to face the unknown together, to mock it, to laugh at it, to honor it, to light a lantern against the dark. And perhaps that is why Halloween continues to endure, no matter how much it changes. Beneath the costumes and candy wrappers lies something older, our need to gather, to share stories, to honor those who came before, and to confront what waits beyond the veil. For one night, the world feels just a little stranger, and we are reminded of how thin the walls of our everyday lives truly are. Here, in the archive, the candle burns low, and the wind rattles softly at the shutters. The shelves are heavy with tomes we have opened, and tomes we have yet to read. But tonight, we close this volume with a smile. For Halloween, with all its shadows and laughter, is a reminder that even the most ordinary nights can be touched with wonder. Until next time, rest well, and let the lantern burn softly in your mind. For the night between worlds will always return, and when it does, we'll be here to welcome it together.